She stood in silence as whispers filled the room. They called her a gold digger, a fraud, a woman who married for money. What no one knew was that she was the billionaire. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Mark Harper grew up in a small Ohio town, the kind of place where everyone knows your business and weekend barbecues turn into gossip sessions by sundown. When he inherited the tech startup his father built, suddenly he was no longer Mark from Milford, but Mark Harper, the guy with the Gulf Coast house, the vintage sports car, the invitations to every major charity gala. His new status felt surreal. Luxury suits, late-night private jets, marble hallways. Yet late at night, as the sound of waves crashed outside his bedroom window, he'd often just lie staring at the ceiling and feel empty. That's when he met Ava Winters at a high-profile charity gala in New York City. She arrived in a soft, blush-pink dress, laughed a little too loud in the ballroom, and for a moment Mark thought maybe this was different. She didn't talk about his money, at least not at first. They found themselves laughing while the orchestra played Fly Me to the Moon, and he thought maybe for the first time in years he could lean into something real. 6 months later they were married in a sun-washed villa in California, one of those weddings that looks effortless on Instagram, white flowers against the blue sky, his mother quietly crying, her father toasting to their future together. Friends said, Mark finally found someone who could match his world. Ava's eyes gleamed when she looked at him. He believed it meant love. For the first year, everything seemed perfect. They traveled to Paris, to the Maldives, his guard relaxed, her laughter easy. But little by little, the tension crept in. One night she came home late from a work networking event, a party in Dubai, an exotic retreat. He found her on the balcony, cigarette in hand, eyes distant. "I just needed a break," she said, voice soft. He nodded, but his heart twisted anyway. 3 years into their marriage, Mark discovered something he never expected. Documents, hidden bank statements in a drawer, meeting receipts for a company he'd never heard of. Ava wasn't secretive exactly, but she was omitting things. When he confronted her, she froze and finally whispered, "I'm sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this." The truth, Ava had married him under pressure. Her mother's mounting debts, student loans that kept rising, her younger sister's medical bills. She had seen Mark's world and thought this was her ticket out. Not that she had planned to betray him. In her mind, she'd just fallen in love with the idea of security. But once the lies began, the fear of losing everything silenced her truth. Mark felt blindsided, not by a cheating scandal, but by betrayal masked as love. His world, built bit by bit, seemed to collapse. But this story doesn't end in tragedy. One rainy afternoon, after the divorce papers were signed and the house was sold, Mark found himself alone in the small kitchen of his old apartment, listening to the kettle boil and remembering the sound of Ava's laugh. He realized wealth could provide everything except the one thing he craved most: genuine trust. He resolved then to rebuild, not his bank account, which was fine, but his life around people who saw him, not his gold. In the final chapter, he started a foundation for young entrepreneurs in underserved towns, returned to the cafe stalls where he first sold gadgets as a kid, and invited his old high school friends back into his life. Life didn't go back to what it was, because it can't, but it became more meaningful. Mark now looks at an old photograph of his wedding day, a soft smile on his face. He knows he learned something precious, that love isn't the absence of risk, it's the willingness to trust despite it. Now I ask you, how would you feel if you were Mark, having almost everything but realizing the biggest loss was belief in someone you trusted? And what would you do if you discovered the person you loved had married you for what you had, not for who you were? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Elena Harper's mornings always began the same way. A quiet walk beneath the crooked oak trees that framed the cobblestone streets of Brindle Cove. She'd pass the bakery where the scent of cinnamon rolls clung to the air, the post office where old Mr. Duffy waved every morning, and the little bookstore across from the library that she now called home. To most, she was simply the soft-spoken librarian, the woman who shelved books with care, offered warm smiles to restless children, and closed the doors each night with the same delicate precision she lived her life with. But in a town where whispers traveled faster than the sea breeze, Elena Harper was anything but ordinary. Some said she'd once married a man twice her age, a man with deep pockets and a mansion that stretched toward the ocean. Others claimed she was after another one. "She married rich once," they'd murmur by the cafe window. "She's after another one." Yet Elena never responded. She simply tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and kept walking, as though the noise of their words couldn't reach her. What no one knew was that Elena Harper had spent her life running from her own last name. The Harper name used to mean power. Her father, Charles Harper, had built one of the largest private investment firms in New York before it all collapsed in scandal. Elena had been only 23 when the news broke, newspaper headlines screaming about fraud, investors fleeing, and her father's sudden death just months later. Since then, she'd disappeared from that world entirely. No interviews, no statements, no trace of the fortune or the fall. Only a woman who quietly relocated to a forgotten town and chose silence over reputation. But silence has a strange way of holding secrets. Inside her small library office, a faded photograph sat in a wooden frame, her father shaking hands with a group of global investors, the kind of men who could change the direction of entire markets with a single signature. Elena would glance at it sometimes, not with pride, but with something closer to regret. She had learned early that wealth came with two things, admiration and enemies, and that neither ever truly disappeared. Still, she kept her head down. She lived in a modest coastal cottage with peeling paint and sea salt crusting the windows, the kind of place where the ocean's roar lulled her to sleep each night. To outsiders, she looked content, a woman rebuilding, living simply, teaching children the joy of stories instead of numbers on a stock exchange. But the truth was more complicated. Every time she heard the clink of high heels on the marble floor of her dreams, every time she smelled the faint scent of expensive perfume that wasn't really there, she was pulled back into a world she wished she could forget. She told herself she'd buried that part of her life, that Charles Harper's daughter was gone for good. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when you least expect them, and so, as the waves crashed against the shore outside her library window, Elena couldn't help but wonder if peace was something she could ever really earn, or if her past was already making its way back to her. Because sooner or later the truth always finds its way home. But why was she hiding? Elena Harper had built a life so quiet that even the tides seemed to move gently around her. Her days followed a rhythm, mornings at the library, afternoons volunteering at the local animal shelter, evenings spent reading by the window as gulls circled over the gray-blue water. She lived modestly, almost deliberately so, in a cottage that smelled faintly of old paper and salt. To the townspeople, it was an odd contrast. They couldn't understand how someone who once lived in marble halls could now find peace in chipped mugs and second-hand sweaters. But Elena never explained herself. She simply smiled, offered kind words, and changed the subject whenever anyone mentioned New York or her family name. The rumors didn't stop, of course. They never do in towns like Brindle Cove. Some said she was hiding a fortune in an offshore account. Others whispered that she was waiting for another wealthy man to rescue her from her humble disguise. The stories grew louder when Daniel Hayes entered her life, a local mechanic with grease-stained hands and an easy laugh that made people trust him instantly. Daniel wasn't like the others. He worked hard, cared for his younger brother after their parents passed, and never asked for more than life offered. Yet even he had heard the talk. The first time he met her, when her old car sputtered to a stop outside his garage, he found himself hesitating before speaking. "You're the librarian, right? The one everyone says used to live in the big city?" She nodded with that small, practiced smile. I used to live in a lot of places, she said softly. Something in her tone, weary but not broken, made him look at her differently. Over the weeks that followed, Daniel found excuses to stop by the library. A book recommendation here, a quick hello there. He never pried, though curiosity sat heavy in his chest. The more he saw her, the more the rumors felt like lies. But the town didn't see what he saw. They saw only what they wanted to believe. When a black luxury car was spotted outside the library one evening, its tinted windows glinting beneath the streetlights, whispers spread faster than wildfire. "She's done it again," they said at the diner. "Someone from her past has come back. You'll see. She's after money again." But the truth was far stranger. The next morning, Elena was seen walking an elderly widow, Mrs. Dalton, back to her small apartment above the flower shop. The old woman clutched a white envelope in her trembling hands, rent money that Elena had quietly slipped inside when no one was looking. "It's just until your son's next check comes in," Elena whispered. "Please don't mention it to anyone." Mrs. Dalton's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do this, dear," Elena smiled faintly. "I know." It wasn't charity for her. It was redemption. Small acts of kindness were her way of atoning for a name that had caused so much harm. Yet the town only saw what it wanted. A woman with secrets. A mystery that made them feel superior to the one who'd fallen from grace. As Daniel watched her that evening, sleeves rolled up, helping children sort donated books in the library, he couldn't shake the question that had started to take root in his mind. Who exactly was Elena Harper hiding from? And why did the mention of her last name still bring that flicker of pain to her eyes? Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones people hide, but the ones they're forced to live with every single day. 5 years earlier, Elena Harper's life was the kind that existed only in glossy magazine spreads and whispered conversations. The daughter of Charles Harper, founder of Harper Industries, one of the largest private investment firms in New York, she grew up in glass towers and chauffeured cars, surrounded by people who smiled for profit and clapped for power. Her father was her anchor, brilliant, disciplined, and fiercely protective. But everything changed the winter he died. One moment, he was the man who built empires with a single handshake. The next, he was gone. A heart attack in the middle of a board meeting. Elena never forgot the silence that followed, the way the men in that room exchanged glances not of grief, but of opportunity. In the weeks after his funeral, she tried to hold the company together. She sat at that long oak conference table, hands trembling, as she flipped through documents she barely understood, surrounded by men twice her age, each smiling politely while quietly plotting behind her back. Her father had trusted them, his partners, his so-called friends, and that trust became the very weapon they used against her. Through forged papers and backroom deals, they transferred company shares under the guise of restructuring. But that wasn't the worst of it. When questions about missing funds surfaced, the board didn't hesitate to protect themselves. They needed a scapegoat, and they found one. His name was Ethan Wells, Elena's fiancé, a man she loved, trusted, and believed would build a future with her beyond the walls of that company. But in the chaos that followed her father's death, Ethan was accused of embezzling millions from Harper Industries. The evidence, falsified bank transfers, fake signatures, pointed directly to him. Within days, headlines screamed, "The spoiled heiress and her crooked lover, Harper Empire in ruins." Cameras followed her everywhere. Former friends avoided her. Reporters camped outside her apartment, shouting questions she didn't know how to answer. Elena tried to fight. She hired lawyers, released statements, begged the truth to be heard. But when the world has already decided what you are, truth becomes noise against a wall of lies. The final blow came when Ethan was arrested, handcuffed on the front steps of their home, pleading that he'd been framed. She believed him, but the damage was done. The board cut her out completely. Harper Industries was renamed, her family's name stripped from the building her father had built from nothing. And just like that, Everything she'd known, the wealth, the friends, the future, vanished. The tabloids had a new villain, and her face was on every cover. They called her the spoiled heiress who ruined everything. They said she'd inherited greed, that she'd watched her father's empire crumble and dragged her fiancé down with it. And when the world believed the lie, she did the unthinkable. She walked away from billions. No press conference, no last defense. Just silence. One morning, she left her penthouse, got into a cab, and disappeared. For years, no one knew where she went. Some claimed she fled overseas. Others said she'd changed her name entirely. But in truth, she found refuge in Brindle Cove, a place untouched by her past, a place where no one recognized the face that once filled financial tabloids. There, she traded designer gowns for cardigans, marble floors for wooden ones that creaked when she walked, and wealth for peace, or at least the closest thing to it. But peace built on secrecy never lasts forever. And in the quiet corners of that coastal town, the shadows of Harper Industries were beginning to find her again. Brindle Cove was the kind of town that thrived on stories, not the ones in books, but the kind whispered between coffee cups and carried on the wind. For months, Elena Harper had become the town's favorite mystery. Some pitied her, others envied her calm composure, and a few simply waited for the day her mask would crack. It started innocently enough. Small talk at the library, invitations to church bake sales, warm smiles that hid sharper intentions. Elena, ever hopeful that maybe she could belong again, began to open up, just a little. She joined a group of local women who met every Thursday for coffee at the corner cafe, a place filled with the hum of gossip and the scent of fresh pastries. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to laugh without caution. Daniel often stopped by after work, his hands still stained with grease, always greeted with the same teasing smile from the cafe owner. "You're just here because she is." He'd shrug, order coffee, and sit by the window, quietly watching her from a distance. When the gossip grew louder, he was the only one who stood up for her. "You all don't know her," he'd say. "She's not who you think." But in small towns, defense can sometimes sound like denial. People began to whisper about Daniel too, how he'd fallen for the woman everyone else thought dangerous. One afternoon, Elena noticed the shift. The way conversations would suddenly fall silent when she entered a room, the sideways glances that followed her every step. She brushed it off, convincing herself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was the beginning. Among the women she'd come to trust was one, Claire, a real estate agent with a smile too wide to be sincere. Claire had once asked Elena about her past, about the city, the company, the rumors she'd heard online. Elena, tired of hiding, offered a carefully measured truth. "I used to work with my father's business, but that was a long time ago." That one sentence was all it took. Curiosity turned to obsession. Claire did what gossipers often do. She searched. Late one night, curiosity led her into the archives of old business reports and scandal articles, and there she found it, the photographs, the headlines, the name Elena Harper. The next day, a single post appeared on social media. "Remember the Harper Industries scandal? She's living right here in Brindle Cove." Within hours, it spread like wildfire, shared, commented on, dissected by strangers who didn't know her but felt entitled to judge her. Screens lit up across the town. The librarian, the quiet woman with the soft voice. Her, the same heiress who'd been accused of ruining her father's empire? By sunset, her phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize, reporters requesting interviews, locals demanding answers. Daniel rushed to the library that evening, only to find her sitting on the floor between the shelves, her phone face down beside her, eyes red from silent tears. "It's all over again," she whispered. "They've turned me into the story I tried to leave behind." Daniel crouched beside her, his voice steady. "Then let them talk. You've survived worse." She looked at him, tired, fragile, yet somehow composed, and managed a small, heartbreaking smile. but kindness couldn't stop what was already in motion. By nightfall, the whispers became headlines. The same faces that once smiled at her now looked at her with judgment and fear. And by the next morning, the entire town knew who Elena Harper really was. By sunrise, Brindle Cove didn't feel like Brindle Cove anymore. The air that once carried the soft hush of waves now buzzed with murmurs and the faint static of camera crews setting up outside the library. Reporters flooded the quiet streets, their microphones glinting in the morning light as they chased the woman who had spent years trying to disappear. "Elena, is it true you fled New York after the scandal? Did you hide company funds? Are you still in contact with Harper Industries?" The questions came rapid and cruel, each one clawing at the calm life she'd so carefully built. Elena kept her head down, the same way she always had. But this time, silence wasn't protection. It was fuel. Every no comment, every trembling breath became another reason for strangers to assume the worst. Daniel found her behind the library later that afternoon, her hands trembling as she tried to load boxes of returned books into her car. "Elena," he said quietly. She didn't turn. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't look at me like that." But Daniel wasn't angry. He was hurt, confused, lost between what he thought he knew and what he'd just learned. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his tone softer than she expected. She closed her eyes. "Because no one ever stays when they find out who I am." Her voice cracked on the last word. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of seagulls filled the air, distant, careless, indifferent to the ruin of human hearts below. Then she said it, the truth she'd buried deeper than any secret before. "I'm not hiding from embarrassment, Daniel. I'm hiding from them." She looked up at him then, eyes heavy with years of fear and exhaustion. "The people who took everything from my father, they're still out there. They control his company, his name, even his memory. They sent messages, lawyers, threats. They wanted me silent, out of sight, so no one would ask questions. So I let the world believe I was broken. I let them think I was nothing, because it was the only way to stay alive." Daniel's breath caught. "You mean they're still watching you?" She nodded. "Always. Every time someone gets too close, a letter shows up, an email, a reminder that I don't own my own story anymore." Her hands shook as she spoke. "You think I wanted this life? I chose it because peace was the only thing left that couldn't be bought." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to face them alone." She smiled sadly, the kind of smile that holds too many memories. "You don't understand. That's exactly what they want. For anyone who helps me to suffer for it. I've seen it happen." For years, she let them believe she was nothing, so she could see who valued her for something. And in that quiet, Daniel realized he already had his answer. But as the evening sun began to fade behind the harbor, another car pulled into town, dark, unfamiliar, expensive. Its driver sat still for a moment, watching the library from a distance, his eyes hidden behind tinted glass. Because one man had followed her here, and he wanted more than her forgiveness. His name was Victor Lane, once her father's right-hand man, now the face of everything that had destroyed the Harper legacy. Ruthless, charming, and dangerously composed, Victor was the kind of man who could smile while holding a knife behind his back. To the public, he was a respected businessman, a visionary who had saved Harper Industries after its collapse. But Elena knew better. She remembered the way he had whispered to her father in closed-door meetings, the way his loyalty shifted the moment power did. He was one of the men who stole the company from her family, and now he was standing on the same cobblestone streets she walked every morning, his polished shoes gleaming against the dirt of Brindle Cove. He didn't come unannounced. His arrival was quiet but deliberate, a black car parked neatly outside the library, a bouquet of white lilies in his hand, and a smile too sharp to be sincere. "Elena," he said when she stepped outside, voice smooth as silk. "You've been hard to find." She froze, that familiar chill crawling up her spine. "You shouldn't be here, Victor." He tilted his head, pretending offense. "I came to make peace. It's been years. Don't you think it's time we talk?" She looked past him, toward the ocean that seemed to echo her heartbeat. "Talk about what? How you buried my father's name to build your empire?" Victor chuckled softly, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "You're still dramatic, I see." "No, Elena. I came because I thought you might need help. You've had a bit of unwanted attention lately." His eyes flickered toward the small crowd of reporters still lingering at the edge of town. "I can make it all go away." She stared at him, her voice trembling but steady. "You don't do anything without expecting something in return." He smiled wider. "You've grown wise. I respect that. But think carefully. You can't stay hidden forever. The world knows who you are again. You can either keep running, or you can come back stronger. With me." The offer hung between them like smoke, tempting, poisonous, familiar. She could almost hear her father's voice warning her about men like Victor, men who build their fortunes on other people's fear. Elena stepped back, clutching her cardigan around her shoulders as the wind picked up. "I'd rather start over with nothing than owe you anything." For a brief moment, Victor's charm cracked. His jaw tightened, his smile faltered just enough for her to see the predator behind the politeness. "You always did have your father's stubbornness," he murmured. It didn't save him either. He turned toward his car, his words deliberate, heavy. "Think about my offer. The world has a short memory, Elena, but enemies don't." As his car disappeared down the road, Daniel emerged from the shadows, his face pale. "Who was that?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes followed the trail of dust behind Victor's car as she whispered, almost to herself, "He wasn't here to make peace. He was here to finish what he started." And as the sky darkened over Brindle Cove, the calm that once protected her began to unravel. Because sometimes the past doesn't just return to haunt you, it comes back to claim what it thinks still belongs to it. That night, sleep never came. Elena sat by her window, the moonlight tracing the edges of her thoughts as she replayed every word Victor had said. "You can't stay hidden forever." The sentence looped in her mind, not as a threat, but as a truth she could no longer ignore. She had run far, built walls around herself, and lived as a shadow in her own life. But deep inside, something had begun to shift. A quiet, burning resolve that refused to die. The next morning, she boarded the earliest train to the city, her first in years. As the scenery blurred past, the calm of Brindle Cove faded behind her, replaced by skyscrapers and memories she'd tried to bury. She made her way to an old brick office tucked away on the corner of Lexington Avenue, the office of Martin Cole, her late father's lawyer, one of the last men who had ever shown her true loyalty. The moment she stepped inside, Martin's assistant froze in disbelief. "Ms. Harper, we thought you'd never come back." Martin himself looked older, his hair now silver, but his eyes still sharp. He stood from behind his desk, emotion flickering across his face. "Elena," he said softly, "I wondered when you'd find your way here." She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Victor Lane was in Brindle Cove," she said. "He's circling again. I need to know if there's anything left, anything my father left behind that he couldn't touch." Martin hesitated, then reached for a thick envelope locked inside his drawer. "I was instructed to give you this, but only if you ever decided to fight." He slid it across the desk. Inside, the papers were brittle, yellowed with age. As she unfolded them, her eyes widened. "These are the original ownership documents?" Martin nodded slowly. "Your father secured a hidden clause, one that transferred controlling shares directly to you. But the clause has a deadline. If you don't claim it within 5 years of his death, it expires. And that's in—" He glanced at his watch, almost as if time itself were mocking them. 3 days. For a moment the room went silent. Elena's heartbeat filled the space between them, steady and fierce. She traced her father's signature with her fingertips, realizing what he had done. He hadn't left her powerless. He had left her a weapon, hidden in plain sight. But to reclaim it, she would have to step back into the very world that destroyed her. To reclaim her life, she'd have to return to the world that destroyed her. That evening, when she returned to Brindle Cove, Daniel was waiting outside her cottage, leaning against the fence. She told him everything: the visit, the documents, the deadline. He listened without interrupting, his expression torn between fear and pride. "You don't owe them anything, Elena," he said finally. "You've already lost enough because of that name." She looked up at him, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe I don't owe them," she said. "Maybe I owe it to myself, to stop running." The wind carried her words across the cliffs, as if the sea itself had been waiting to hear her say them. And in that moment, something inside her changed. For the first time in years, Elena Harper wasn't just surviving. She was preparing for war. The city greeted her like a ghost she'd left unfinished. Towering glass, endless noise, and the faint echo of her name whispered in every reflection. Elena Harper, the woman who vanished. Now, she was back. Not as a fugitive, but as a storm quietly gathering force. As the train rumbled through the gray morning light, memories bled through the windows like fading film reels. Her father's voice during late-night board meetings, her fiancé's face the day they accused him, the flash of cameras when the tabloids branded her the Harper heiress scandal. Each image stitched itself over the skyline, a cruel reminder of everything she'd lost, and everything she still had to reclaim. The city hadn't changed, but she had. She no longer moved with the timid grace of a woman afraid of being seen. Every step through the marble lobby of Harper Industries was deliberate, every glance a message. The receptionist froze when she saw her, disbelief flickering across her face. "Miss Harper, you're—" Elena smiled faintly. "Alive?" she said. "Let's not make it dramatic. I'm here for what's mine." But the moment she stepped into the boardroom, the warmth evaporated. Former colleagues avoided her gaze. Some whispered, others smirked. At the head of the table sat Victor Lane, uninvited but unsurprised. "Elena," he said smoothly, as though her return had been part of his plan all along. "Welcome home." His words were calm, but the tension was sharp enough to cut air. She laid the documents on the polished table, her reflection fractured across its surface. "These prove I'm still the majority shareholder. I'm reclaiming my seat." The silence that followed was almost theatrical, the kind of silence that comes before a blade is drawn. Victor leaned back, his voice low. "You always had a flair for dramatics, but paper means nothing if you don't have allies. And from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're standing alone." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I've been alone before. It's when I do my best work." The tension lingered as the board members shifted, some uncertain, some afraid. But behind those glass walls, one face didn't match the others. A quiet man in the corner, watching too closely, too carefully. Elena caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the smallest hint of guilt. And as she walked out of the room, her father's words echoed in her mind like a whisper carried by wind. "Trust is a currency, Elena. Spend it wisely." She didn't know it yet, but someone inside Harper Industries wasn't who she thought. That night, the city rain fell harder than she remembered, like it was washing something clean or burying something deeper. Elena sat in her hotel room, the city lights flickering through the window, her father's files spread across the table. Each paper told the story of betrayal, numbers shifted, signatures forged, decisions made in her absence. But one signature stopped her cold. It wasn't Victor's. It wasn't any of the board's. It was his, the man she once trusted with her heart, her fiancé, Thomas. The man the world believed had vanished after being accused of stealing from her family. She stared at the ink like it might change if she blinked hard enough. Thomas Reed, Chief Financial Consultant, Lane Holdings. Her chest tightened. The air left the room. Memories crashed in like a flood. His promises, his laughter, his hand slipping away in the chaos of flashing cameras 5 years ago. She'd mourned him, buried him in her heart. And now he was sitting beside the very man who destroyed her family. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "He was part of it all along?" The words barely made it past her lips. For the first time in years, tears fell, not for the fortune she lost, but for the illusion she once called love. Victor's plan had never been about money. It had been about control, knowing exactly which pieces to move and which hearts to break. Thomas had been the perfect weapon. By dawn, the storm outside mirrored the one in her chest. Lightning cracked against the skyline as she stood by the window, her reflection fractured by the rain. The woman staring back wasn't the broken heiress the tabloids once mocked. She was something else now, colder, steadier, unafraid. Narrator. Love had been her weakness once, but not this time. She folded the document, slid it into her coat, and whispered to the night, "You fooled me once, Thomas. Never again." The camera of fate turned slow, her walking through puddles, coat whipping in the wind, determination hardening with each step. The rain couldn't hide her tears anymore. And somewhere in the distance, under the same storm, Thomas Reed watched her return, the ghost he helped create, now coming for everything she was owed. By morning, the whispers had turned into headlines. Elena Harper returns. Scandal heiress faces the empire that betrayed her. Every news outlet wanted her story. Every journalist wanted her fall. But this time, she wouldn't hide behind silence. She would use it. The old Harper Industries conference hall, the same place her father once stood to announce the company's rise, was now packed with cameras, reporters, and former board members hiding behind their polished smiles. The world had come to watch her break again. Instead, they would see her rise. Elena stepped up to the podium, a single folder in her hands. The hum of murmurs filled the room. Victor Lane sat in the front row, his smirk wide, confident, like a man watching a storm he thought he controlled. "Ms. Harper," a reporter called out, "is it true you falsified company records?" She didn't flinch. "No," she said, "but I know who did." The room fell silent. She opened the folder. Line by line, document by document, she laid bare the truth. Wire transfers, forged signatures, offshore accounts. Every lie the board had built their fortune on now lay naked before the world. Then came the proof of her inheritance, the controlling shares her father left her, hidden under a clause Victor thought he'd buried. She looked him dead in the eye. "My father trusted the wrong people, but he didn't raise a fool." Victor leaned forward, his voice a venomous whisper that carried through the microphones. "You think anyone will believe the gold digger?" The word hung in the air, cruel and deliberate. The insult that had once destroyed her life. Elena smiled softly, not with anger, but with calm defiance. "That's the thing, Victor. I never needed anyone's money. I was the money." Gasps rippled through the room. She held up a single document, her trust statement, proving her billionaire status years before she ever met the men who tried to ruin her. The flashes from cameras turned the air electric, blinding in their brilliance. The narrative shattered in an instant. The gold digger was the gold itself. The woman they'd vilified had been wealthier, smarter, and far more capable than the men who called her a fraud. But as the truth burned through the airwaves, something in her chest tightened. Because with that revelation, with every headline that began to rewrite her story, she realized something devastating. The moment she reclaimed her name, she lost her anonymity. The quiet life she'd built, the peace she'd found in Brindle Cove, the small-town friends who saw her as just Elena, all of it was gone. Narrator. The revelation would cost her more than money. It would cost her the only thing she'd ever wanted, to be seen not as a Harper, but as herself. And as the cameras continued to flash, Elena looked out into the sea of lenses and saw the faces of the people who'd once judged her. She didn't see victory. She saw the price of truth, heavy, lonely, and irreversible. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, federal agents arrived at Harper Industries. The same board members who once smiled beside Victor Lane now turned on him, their alliances dissolving like ink in water. Cameras followed him as he was led out in handcuffs, his smirk finally gone. Justice, quiet, unannounced, had found its way home. Across every channel, Elena's face filled the screen. The gold digger headline was gone, replaced by a single word the world had long denied her: Harper. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply watched from the corner of her office, hands clasped, eyes distant. After years of running, hiding, and hurting, the noise outside no longer mattered. The truth had spoken for her. Then came the press statement that no one expected. Thomas Reed, the man she once loved, the man who'd betrayed her, stood before the same cameras that had once vilified her. His voice was trembling as he read his confession. "I helped Victor Lane falsify documents. I betrayed the woman who trusted me. I was weak, and I let greed decide who I became." He paused, swallowing hard. Elena didn't ruin Harper Industries. We did. The admission sent shockwaves across the nation, but Elena didn't watch his apology. She was done living through other people's words. She was already gone, miles away, back in Brindle Cove, where the ocean met the quiet streets she'd come to love. Daniel saw her from a distance that morning, standing by the pier as the sun rose behind her. She didn't need to say a word. Her silence said everything. Narrator. The woman they mocked had built an empire on silence, and when she finally spoke, the world listened. Weeks passed, and the noise faded. The world moved on, as it always does. But in small corners of that coastal town, quiet miracles began to happen. The local shelter she'd once volunteered at reopened, anonymously funded. The widow she'd helped now ran a reading program in the library. The name on the donation plaques was never Harper. It was always E. H. Elena had reclaimed her legacy, but she chose to rebuild it on her own terms, not through headlines or wealth, but through compassion. She didn't return to boardrooms or mansions. She returned to people, and in every life she quietly changed. She found fragments of peace the world could never take from her. The music of her story didn't end in triumph or tragedy. It ended in balance, in silence, in the kind of redemption that doesn't need applause to be felt. The morning tide whispered against the sand as Elena walked along the shoreline, barefoot, unhurried, free. The sky blushed with the first light of dawn, the kind of sunrise that feels like forgiveness. For the first time in years, she didn't need to hide her face, her name, or her past. The sea stretched before her, endless and quiet, mirroring the peace she had fought so long to find. Every step left a fleeting print in the sand, washed away by waves that didn't care who she had been, heiress, outcast, or survivor. She paused for a moment, the wind catching her hair, her eyes glinting in the soft light. Somewhere behind her, the world still talked, still judged, still speculated. But here, in the hush between the ocean and the rising sun, none of it mattered anymore. Narrator. They called her a gold digger, but she was never digging for gold. She was searching for something rarer: dignity, truth, and love. A faint smile touched her lips as the waves reached her feet. In that stillness, there were no cameras, no headlines, no echoes of betrayal, only the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat and the quiet certainty that she had finally come home to herself. The piano rose softly in the distance, a melody without words, the kind that lingers long after it ends. As the sun climbed higher and the light spilled across the water, Elena turned once more toward the horizon, not as the woman the world misjudged, but as the woman she'd finally become. And with that, her story. of loss, of silence, of reclamation, faded gently into the morning light. Sometimes the richest hearts are the ones that give the most. Elena Harper's story wasn't about money, power, or revenge. It was about finding peace in a world that mistook silence for weakness. It was about a woman who lost everything and still chose compassion over bitterness, truth over comfort, and love over fear. Her journey reminds us that strength isn't always loud, and healing doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like walking alone on a quiet beach, finally free from the weight of the past. But now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? Was Elena right to hide her identity, or should she have revealed it sooner? If you were in her shoes, would you have done the same? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might inspire someone watching right now. And if this story touched you, hit the like button. It helps us reach more people who love powerful, true-to-life stories, just like this one. Before you go, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story, because sometimes the most ordinary lives hide the most extraordinary truths. Soft piano plays as her name fades across the screen. Elena Harper, the woman who found gold not in wealth, but in worth.